Did you know that the largest medicinal cannabis grower is from New Zealand? PURO is one of the largest large-scale accredited organic growers in the world. This company focuses on growing, both indoors and outdoors, pure, premium medicinal cannabis. The New Zealanders received recognition as Growers of the Year at the Australian Cannabis Awards 2021. In this edition of Cannabis World Journals, PURO NZ tell us about their organic cannabis growing process.
Mr. Average, how are you? Thank you so much for accepting. We're very happy that you accepted our invitation for this interview. I was very excited about when I learned about your company. It's a really exciting thing that is going on over there in New Zealand. And well, you already saw our questions. These are basically guidelines to move along the interview, and depending on your answers and how we see the interview going, we'll maybe create new ones and ask you something new. But sure. Basically, the main question is, how did the idea for PURO NZ came about?
Well, I have drafted a few sort of answers to some of those questions as well, which have gone through to you just recently on via emails. So I'll just sort of talk to some of those. Just almost an administrative question. Will this video go live publicly, or is this for internal purposes?
Our video is mainly for the magazine to transcribe the interview. However, if our interviewers agree and the interview is successful, we usually post them in our YouTube channel, but previous agreement with the interview.
That is absolutely fine.
Suits you best. If you agree for us to use it on our YouTube channel, we would posteriorly then edit it and send it to your team for a previous review of the video before we publish it. So if it's good with you, we can do that, or just use it for transcribing means.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. It was just more of a question for my understanding, and also to make sure I was looking in the camera rather than my second screen. So,
all right, thank you.
Thank you for that. So look, the PURO came about in late 2018. I was fortunate to be introduced to Tom Forrest and Sank McFarlane. Now, Tom is a global expert in cannabis agronomy, and he was looking to establish a large medical cannabis facility in New Zealand. Tom identified PURO's cultivation sites as ideal locations for organic production. Sank's family were looking to diversify their stunning farm in Kikarengu, which they have owned for 5 generations. Tom's approach was well received by the McFarlane family, as it aligned closely with their environmental outlook. Now, my role amongst all of that was to help develop and lead the business, and it all fell into place from there.
That sounds great. What do you think is the impact that the medical cannabis legalization has had in New Zealand at this time?
Look, it's still early days. The legislation was enacted just a little under 2 years ago, and we're starting to see some real progress now. And as a pioneer of the industry, PURO has navigated through a complex number of rules and regulations, in which of course there's been some challenges, but it has ultimately led to the emergence of a really credible and highly professional network of cannabis companies here in New Zealand. We're also super excited to see New Zealand grown cannabis available to both New Zealanders and also buyers around the world.
From what I saw on your website, you have had really great success in a very short time, and New Zealand has really opened up to this to the plant, and this is really great because compared to other countries, your growth has been really exponential. So how do you feel about that? How do you feel about PURO and how it's developing currently with the cannabis industry?
We're moving at a fast pace. So the New Zealand industry is reasonably new here, and we're at the absolute forefront of that. So it's the regulations that were introduced here in New Zealand by the government. They did that in quite a hurry, and they did that intentionally to get this industry up and running as fast as could be possible. So it's been a slightly slower start as far as understanding the regulations and getting to market than we actually would have liked. But ultimately, we've managed to achieve more in the last 3 years than, certainly in the last 12 months, than most other cannabis companies, certainly in our region, and most likely global, have been able to achieve in their actual entire lifespan. So we are moving very, very fast. The New Zealand regulations are quite nimble in the sense that they allow us to operate quickly and grow at a very significant scale. And this year is when, well, certainly last year as well, is an enormous success, and this year is truly when we commercialize and the rubber hits the road.
Yeah, that brings me to the next question, which is the two developments that I saw regarding your company: the alliance with Helios and the organic certification. Was that something that you were striving for since the beginning?
Absolutely. So we have always been organic in our heart. So the reason we have adopted organic protocols or chose to go organic is it's because it's the right thing to do. So it's really come from our land and our people. It's what we're really passionate about. And then ultimately, we then applied for the accreditation and the certification. So at the time, we didn't quite realize how unique it was to be organic. There's obviously a lot of other growers out there that are certainly attempting to adopt, organic and sustainable practices, but to achieve full organic accreditation is really, really unique and really special. So we are the only cannabis company in New Zealand or Australia that has got full organic accreditation, and we understand we're one of the few companies globally that are producing pharmaceutical grade cannabis or medical cannabis with organic accreditation. So it's really, really neat. And the second aspect, obviously, with that is our very significant supply agreement that was announced with Helios Therapeutics. So Helios are a very large manufacturer of cannabis medicines based in Auckland, New Zealand, and PURO is obviously, as you may know, is the largest grower of medical cannabis in New Zealand. So we have a wonderful relationship with Helios, as we do with many other companies here in New Zealand, and Helios have signed a very, very large agreement to essentially acquire and purchase over 10 tonne of our organic cannabis flower, which they will then make into 100% New Zealand grown, manufactured, branded medicine for New Zealanders and for global markets. So it's a watershed agreement that puts New Zealand cannabis on the world map, and both Helios and PURO are really, really pleased and proud of that agreement.
I've seen that you've worked really hard for your organic certification, and it's something that you've been talking about. What is the organic certification for our readers that have not much knowledge about how to get an organic certification? I know your alliance was a huge step towards the business of cannabis within New Zealand. So how was the process? Can you tell us a little bit more about the organic certification?
Absolutely. So look, there's a lot of companies out there globally that will use the word organic on their website or on some of their promotional marketing materials, which is obviously misleading and clearly wrong if they are not organic or certainly not organically certified and accredited. So the big difference with PURO is we have gone through the formal process and accreditation. So BioGrow New Zealand, who are the largest and best known organic certifier and globally recognized for their accreditations, they have been working with PURO to essentially approve and fast track our organic status. So that process kicked off about 18 months ago. It is typically a 3-year process with BioGrow, but it's because we've had we've had 3 years of cultivation, and we've kept all our records, and all of our practices and protocols have been organic from the very, very outset. And likewise, the soil of the farm that we're growing in has been following our farm sustainability plan for several years. So there's been no synthetic chemicals or anything unfortunate applied to the land. So That allowed Puro to essentially fast track what was normally a 3-year minimum process. We've achieved that in about 18 months working with BioGrow. So it's obviously very, very rigorous, and it required an in-depth look at every system and process at Puro, all the way from germination to cultivation through to drying and then packaging of our flower. A big part of that is what's known as a quality management system. So Puro has a very advanced quality management system and QA processes. All of our standard operating procedures have been written and developed by a very highly experienced team, which is led by Dr. Zoe Clow and Wendy Tillman. Their knowledge of science, regulatory pathways, and compliance system has enabled Puro to fast track its organic accreditation, and currently we're now being assessed for GACP. So that is ultimately pretty then Puro will be both organic and GACP accredited.
That's so great. That brings a curious question for me. How does your company approach the innovative processes? How do you come up with these mechanisms and things for going through the process of being organic and all that? So because you're breaking ground basically.
We are. Look, it's to be honest, it's rigor. It's a mindset. You have to be very, very disciplined. So any process, if we were to all of our processes are documented and followed really accurately across our entire cultivation team. So what we're looking there to do is to ensure that we do not unintentionally or do anything that may breach our organic protocols or accreditation. So any nutrient that's applied to the plants is obviously all organic, but we check and double check every one of those just in case there is an accident or a supplier has given us something by mistake. So that you can imagine the rigor that is required to not only achieve organic status, but then to maintain organic status. It's a huge layer of complexity into the business, but that's just what is needed because ultimately we're really, really proud of our organic position, and it's not something that is easily obtainable, and we welcome the rigor and the insight from our regulators and the compliance team to ensure that every action, every process, every plant is growing as environmentally safely as it possibly can.
Do you think that has impacted how quickly the company has grown in these 2 years?
Look, it has. It has. So we've always had sort of ambitions to be a large or sort of global size cultivator. New Zealand's got a very unique opportunity and a very unique climate that is well suited for production of high quality cannabis for medicines. So we have been able to fast track that. The organic processes and rigor and compliance and so forth ties in really well with our entire company philosophy. So, that obviously GACP and also GMP. So whilst we are not GMP, we are selling our flower and material to GMP buyers who will then make them into medicines under a GMP license. So we have to be fully compliant for their processes and their quality assurance systems and so forth. So it has allowed us to fast track and basically ensure that our cultivation is matched with the compliance. Otherwise, it is you can grow the product, but if without the accreditations, you are unable to sell it.
Yeah, and that it's a problem, of course. Do you see any correlation between your company's vision and philosophy towards the industry and the ideologies behind the cannabis legalization movement currently taking place in the world?
Sure. Look, our vision, or Puro's vision, is to set the global standard for organic medical cannabis. Our business model has come about due to the legislative movements and change in ideology across the globe. Like our environmental focus and approach to the cultivation of cannabis is driven by that philosophy. So yes, absolutely.
How have let me rephrase. How do you think the mentality has changed from the moment cannabis was legalized in New Zealand and currently with all this growth that your company has seen?
Sure. Look, we've had enormous support for our industry. So, in fact, we've had the medical cannabis industry in New Zealand is supported throughout the entire country. The legislation that was brought in to introduce New Zealand's medical cannabis scheme, that was supported by all political parties in government. And in my 3 years at the helm of PURO, the only concern that we've had from our community is just essentially access and the barriers to accessing medical cannabis affordably. We find our community, our people, and all of New Zealand, they're either convinced around medical cannabis or highly intrigued. And the support we've received from our community for setting up this industry here has been phenomenal. And we just simply could not have had the success and the speed and the momentum that we've had if it wasn't for that support from our community.
Now,
Do you think?
Sorry, Vera. Now that you speak of
No,
your
go.
community, I was a little bit curious because you become a big titan, let's say, in the industry, and I think it's very exciting for our readers to know about that. But as well, you are in a key strategic place where you have access to various different cultures and various different continents. How has been your experience trading with your local markets, not only the New Zealand and Australia, of course, since you're closely bounded, but let's say the Asian market?
Sure. So look, firstly, a lot of global buyers are very, very intrigued and interested about the New Zealand cannabis industry. And we are supported and represented by the New Zealand government. So NZTE, which is New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, which is the New Zealand government's export arm, is taken New Zealand cannabis or PURO cannabis globally. So they are supporting with our approach to communicate to global markets around the supply of cannabis flower, either as a final product, which will be GMP, which is ultimately from the likes of Helios and other manufacturers in New Zealand, or as a biomass flower that PURO will be producing and selling directly to global manufacturers. So we've received enormous response. Clearly, our relationship and close economic ties with Australia is very helpful for PURO in New Zealand. We consider Australia as an extension of our domestic market. And then globally, there are a few countries, I guess, and regions that we are more focused on than others. Europe is a primary focus, primarily because New Zealand's regulations, which are based around the European Pharmacopoeia Standards, or EU GMP. So all flower that leaves this country has to be tested to that standard, which means that it's obviously one of the highest, and if not the highest quality standard in the world. So everything we produce aligns with European standards. So that's obviously one focus for our export markets. Asia is really key for us. Exporting flower into Asia and in certain parts of Asia could be challenging and is challenging. Whereas the export of finished products, so like a CBD oil, and finished medicinal products, is more likely the pathway into Asia, or in most countries in Asia. That partnership agreement with Helios and future partnership agreements we will be announcing with other manufacturers here in New Zealand and Australia will enable those products. So made in New Zealand products to be supplied into Asia. So it's really exciting.
Very curious because, finesse products, as you call them, the basic, let's say, plants and root material that we would think would have a great impact on the Asian community. And it's just not only economic, but cultural, because Asia has always had a big root with the herbs that they use within their medicine, and they still use it as a big part of their culture. So to find out that finesse products are paving the way for the market instead of the primary root, which is the basic plant, it's a very interesting part to know about. Do you think the culture has had something to do with it? Because they have a huge industrial market. So in order for them to export just the finesse products and not to finesse it themselves, we find it very curious. What do you think about that?
Sure. So that is driven entirely by regulation. So for us to export flower, for instance, for us to export flower into America would be highly improbable and challenging to get that across the border. Whereas to get finished products in that are of GMP standard is more of an accessible pathway. Now into Asia, it's a very similar approach. It's the regulations, but more importantly, there it's THC. So many countries in Asia, and I'm obviously being quite generic here with grouping. There's obviously several countries at once, so I do apologize in advance for any ambiguity here. But a lot of countries in Asia do not allow THC products or any traces of THC. So all of our flower that we produce, and most of the flower we produce, is high CBD and low THC, but clearly it still contains traces of THC. Very, very minimal traces,
Right.
but there are some jurisdictions that require 0.00%, which is not possible from a flower
Yes, the
product.
psychoactivity component of THC has been something that international markets and regulations have big stop on that. Vero, go ahead.
Well, regarding now after this talking about the markets, what are your expectations regarding the advancement of the cannabis industry in New Zealand and the continental region? How do you see your competitive peers? Let's put it that way. Do you see any more companies in New Zealand developing, growing along yours?
Absolutely. So there's a handful of fantastic companies here in New Zealand that are sort of helping form and shape the industry, and then there's several others that are playing key roles and contributing to the industry as well. So we've set up to be as a contract grower. So PURO's role in the value chain is to grow the cannabis. We will be producing the biomass flower organically, and likewise finished flower products for markets and for our buyers. And then our focus thereafter really comes into cultivar development and seed production, and ensuring that we're producing some of the world's best cannabis accordingly. We sell primarily to manufacturers. So the other industry players here in New Zealand are our partners, every single one of them, even if they're doing their own cultivation. So we work closely with several parties. Many of those are still waiting for their manufacturing and GMP licenses before they can start producing cannabis medicine. But obviously, as you know, Helios and there's another company, Rua, have both been issued their GMP licenses. And we have announced, obviously, that very significant agreement with Helios for medicines to be manufactured, or made in New Zealand's medicines to be manufactured here in New Zealand.
Now that you have become such an important asset to the New Zealand export, and now that you're dealing in such massive quantities and with such big players in the industry, how is the process of selling these products? Is it something that you do as an internal networking, or have you been involved in publicity? Because publicity is something that's very interesting for our readers. Most of them are startups that are just beginning, and getting into publicity for their type of products can become a bit of a hassle, especially with all the CEO words that have been banned, given the bias that has been all around cannabis all over the years. So in your experience in getting new clients, in building up the whole market that you've built up, have you done it through networking? Have you been involved in the publicity of cannabis?
It's a little bit of both, but it's primarily networking. So the buyers are really looking for credibility, trust. They need the products to be proven and demonstrated that through accreditation. So even going back to our organic status, many of our buyers are not actually buying necessarily because we're organic. It's more because the fact that going through the rigor and rigmarole of achieving organic status demonstrates that our products are genuine. The quality systems and accreditations are in place. There is another quite intensive auditing process on our QA systems and our final products that are available for purchase. So it's quite a strong point of difference into global markets, and obviously the fact that being organic is really appealing and intriguing for those buyers too. So we've approached several parties individually. We've also had approaches directly from those buyers, and then likewise the New Zealand government is supporting us with introductions and with facilitating sales of New Zealand cannabis to global markets.
That's amazing. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about the production process, because the whole area of New Zealand and Australia has been heavily impacted by what is the climate change in recent years. Have you felt that has had an impact on the cannabis industry and on the growth process within the domestic market that you have?
Sure. So our sites were chosen by Tom Forrest, who's a global expert in cannabis agronomy. Now, our outdoor site, which is in a little place called Kikaringu along the Kaikoura coast, South Marlborough, is one of the driest parts of New Zealand, and it was intentionally chosen because it's very sunny. It's got high sunshine hours, high UV. It's also got a daily sea breeze, and it's located near the ocean. So that for us allows just a natural reduction in pests, risk of pests and disease due to the sort of salt spray and the breeze that comes through that aerates the plants. In Australia, they have, in some parts of New Zealand, particularly the northern parts of New Zealand, have had some humidity issues with cultivation, any outdoor cultivation. So PURO has not faced those challenges, but it doesn't mean we never will. So the biggest issues with outdoor cultivation, particularly around the harvest time, is in our region is powdery mildew and botrytis, which are also quite problematic in the wine industry. So our cultivation strategy is focused solely around mitigating those risks. We just said around the airflow is really key, but we also defoliate all of our plants in the outdoor field and just monitor that. Every plant is monitored daily, every second day for any signs of pest or disease or any signs of males, hermaphrodites, and because obviously we're growing feminized plants, and any signs of any risk that plant's immediately removed. So it forms a huge part, and it just sort of underlines how intensive or labor intensive and focused that the your cultivation efforts have to be to ultimately produce to a pharmaceutical standard.
Yeah, of course. So the position that you're talking about is very interesting, especially given the coastal part. Have you involved genetic breeding in order to make the plants more resistant to that type of weather and that type of mildew?
Look, we are. That's a big part of our business. So there's essentially three pillars to our business model, or our cultivation model, and these were formed by Tom Forrest in the very, very early days. So as we touched on, we've got the large outdoor production facility that primarily is producing biomass as a starting material for a medicines manufacture process. The indoor facility, which is primarily focused towards producing prescription flower, premium flower that will is a finished product. And then the third pillar of our cultivation model is our research and breeding facility. So that facility is it's built. It's now fully operational. And the purpose of that facility is to develop unique cultivars and genetics that are ideal for or optimal for New Zealand's unique climate. So that process is continuing. Most of the seeds that we have commenced our commercial production with have come from other breeding programs across the globe. So Tom is well connected into universities and most of the local, or certainly leading breeders in America and Europe, and likewise in Australia. So we've taken that knowledge and brought in or imported in most of our starting genetics, but we're also utilising and playing around with some of New Zealand's local genetics, which are pretty powerful and impressive too. And then ultimately will be the breeding process and the breeding facility will be producing a number of very unique cultivars for the New Zealand industry that will be bred to be pest and disease tolerant, and likewise high potency and stable cultivars.
That's very interesting. Because all of these questions is something that's very interesting to all of our readers, figuring out how the building process and, everything that's involved with cannabis and exporting cannabis, it has a lot of insecurities, and it comes from the breeding process, then managing the climate. But I also wanted to talk to you, what are the precautions that you take, because you are exporting organic material. So in order to maintain these qualities that you've standardized with European standards and everything that you've built with your certification, how do you maintain this fresh quality and this standard process within the export process? I mean, the packaging, the shipping, everything, so that it stays fresh.
Absolutely. So we've invested a considerable amount of time, cost, and knowledge into determining optimal packaging solutions. So we dry our flower down to below 10% in moisture content, sometimes as low as 8%. And then we have a very rigorous process following that, also throughout the entire post-harvest process, that ensures that all of our batches are separated, so there is no risk or potential risk of contamination from any wet material, any undried flower, through to the dried product. So ultimately, when the flower is dried down and milled and trimmed, or trimmed, we then ensure that room is completely secure, so there is no risk of any contamination or mold spurs or anything that comes from the wet material. So on that basis, that all of our dried material is mold free and is a very low moisture content, and then we package them with a nitrogen purge into vacuum sealed bags, and then likewise box and we'll put them into various drums available for export. So we will typically air freight any cannabis that leaves this country, but the shelf stability of that product from our last harvest, which was March last year, is when we harvest in our country. So a product from March last year is still under stability, and we've seen very little, if no degradation at all on that product. So ultimately, that's been quite a global success. Thank you. But we are working on 6 months stability, but obviously 12 months is anything over 12 months is very, very positive, and looks like we will achieve that.
Well, that is incredible. Now, let's talk about navigating the industry, because I know you've already been an established actor, and most people who are doing startup are just, let's say, not to get a lot political, but let's say fighting the system. But now that you are established actor, have you found yourself being a little bit more active as a company with the changes in legislation, not only nationally, but you have to navigate towards changes in legislations internationally, especially because for a couple of years, when you get one government which sets up a couple of race rules, and then the next change of power, it changes it. Have you been involved in politics, and what has been your experience navigating these regulations?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So we kind of jump back to, we often say that we're very enthusiastic farmers, and we try and sort of steer clear from too many political heavyweight discussions. But ultimately, given the size of our company and given the fact that the New Zealand government is sort of representing us and did a lot of due diligence on us, on PURO, before they sort of took us on as a client to take us, help take our cannabis globally. So we are quite heavily involved with many government processes and regulatory bodies. The advice is to, they are, I mean, here in New Zealand, we're very fortunate. We have quite stable government. So even if we do change from one political party to the other, it's typically only around the margins. We don't see significant change, and certainly we would imagine there'd be no impact on our industry whatsoever if there was a change of government. It just, in this very, very small world, the opposition leader was sitting beside my business partner and director on the aeroplane just a few weeks ago, and they got chatting around our industry, and hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but was certainly very supportive of medical cannabis, and what we're doing for our region and our people, and being able to achieve export earnings for the country. So on balance, we're fortunate that we don't have flip-flop or regulatory movement that we have to contend with, but ultimately our regulations have some nuances, which is probably the polite way of saying they can be frustrating at times. On balance, they are pretty good. Our business model to be able to grow full spectrum organic cannabis, outdoors and indoors, and sell it as a starting material or biomass flower to global buyers is. And likewise with the amount of seeds and the different genetic bank and library that we are allowed to declare, including from illicit starting material, like New Zealand regulations have some really, really big bonuses and pluses, and we're quite fortunate in some respects. On other respects, there are clearly some frustrations and nuances that could be and will be and should be ironed out. And the best approach for that we've found, sometimes you do need to jump up and down a wee bit. That's just human nature in life. But most of the times you kind of understand the people at the other side are not intentionally trying to be difficult. And we kind of adopted as a partnership model that, if we can provide genuine feedback based around trust and provenness that a change here will have a positive impact over there, then they're more likely to adopt that. So we understand there is a regulatory review here in New Zealand later this year, which will be a great chance for our entire industry, not just to voice some concerns or some changes that we would like. And ultimately, if the entire industry is saying very similar messages, and they're also getting those same messages from different parts of government and different parts of the community, including local iwi and our Māori population here, then we would sort of, they would listen, and they do listen. So, but on occasion, a grumpy letter does get written, I have to admit.
Yes. Does this hinder your ability to think about the long term? Do you have vision for the company in the long run, 20 years from now? Where do you envision the company headed?
Sure. Well, we sort of see PURO as we're pioneering an industry, and we've got one chance to set the industry up right from the start and on the right footing. So that's a big part of our, sustainable, organic, and environmentally focused practices. Now, the industry as a whole, we see it's huge potential. So the New Zealand wine industry here in New Zealand is world renowned, particularly our Sauvignon Blanc, which is right in the middle of our cultivation sites in Marlborough, are right in the middle of New Zealand's wine country. So we take a lot of inspiration from the New Zealand wine industry, which is worth about 2.3 New Zealand billion dollars, which I can take a big step here, which is about $1.5 US.
Well, congratulations.
$1 billion to our country. So it's absolutely huge. I think it's our 6th biggest export earner for the country. So we would envisage the medical cannabis industry could be the size of the wine industry in 20 years' time. And even if it was half the size of the wine industry, we're talking tens of thousands of jobs and over $1 billion of earnings for the country. So that's certainly our vision. That's certainly shared from industry and from government. But ultimately, we need to prove, take the steps on that journey and prove to the world that New Zealand cannabis has a high value niche and high value focus as other products such as wine, kiwi fruit, and primary goods that New Zealand is very renowned for producing.
Mm-hmm. Now, here in Cannabis World Journals, we believe education has become a pillar in advancing this industry. Most people who start out within the industry, they start out by trial and error. And then they get people within different fields that come within the industry of the cannabis industry, and they just go by trial and error and start progressing along the way. Now, you have had a very big, well-rounded company that I imagine has created thousands of jobs for New Zealand and for the industry itself. Now, do you find easily in the market people who are already let's say, trained within the market, or do you find the need to search different fields and then train them within the industry yourself? How do you feel education has advanced within the industry?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, and a big challenge our industry faces as we grow and expand is to have access to the talent and the skills that are needed to, across multiple aspects of the value chain. So Puro, apart from a very small number of our team, we've all come from different industries outside of cannabis, and we've sort of brought the skills that we've learnt in those industries to this business and to this industry. So as I touched on before around the New Zealand wine industry, we've been very fortunate that a lot of our staff have come from quite senior positions in the wine industry, including in the organic wine industry. And those skills, for instance, are highly transferable to what we are doing for our quality management systems and compliance and regulatory processes. So we've been able to adopt and learn and absorb and be taught from New Zealand's leading primary industries, which is very, very fortunate. And then we've also imported some skills. So we've had individuals that have come from other countries to come work for Puro. They've been attracted to the organic value proposition and the sustainability focus, which has been a real key to to basically recruit some of the brightest minds, well, certainly the brightest minds in this region, some of the brightest minds in the industry. And then we train on site. So we do work with local Ministry of Social Development, who's one of the, helping people find work here in New Zealand, local iwi, local community, in Kaikoura and Blenheim to sort of bring in youth and young people or other skills into our company, and we train them on site. But ultimately, we are, as an industry, we are looking for the universities here in New Zealand and the polytechs and the institutes of technology to provide those skills, and they do, in the sense that even we're a cultivation company, and most of our skills going forward are going to be required to be in plant science and horticulture. So we can and we do recruit from other industries or those postgraduate students that are leaving some of the universities here in New Zealand. But most of the skills and most of the intimate skills will be trained on site.
That is amazing. Now, just a couple more questions to not take up a lot of your time. You've talked a lot about the value that you give to the national industry, national workers, the national economy, and providing jobs for everyone. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about the product itself. I know we've talked about genetics and elaborating them so they can adapt to the environment. But have you built any more autochthonous things within the brand? Let's say flavors, let's say different soils that might be unique to New Zealand. Have you taken advantage of another geographical condition? Do you find New Zealand's representation within the brand itself to be embedded within your product?
We're on the pathway to proving a lot of that, and that's a big focus of our research and development within the company, is to essentially demonstrate the same characteristics that allow for New Zealand wine, and particularly New Zealand's Sauvignon Blanc, which is produced in Marlborough, where we're located. Now, that comes from the climate and the soil, comes from the high UV and long sunshine hours. So my role in the business is to not get in the way of the cultivation team. So I'll talk a little bit carefully around the sort of their processes, I guess, or theories, but Tom's certainly very enthusiastic around the secondary metabolites that help produce Marlborough's unique flavour of wine. We do believe that is going to be a key part of Puro's cannabis distinction going forward. Ultimately, that's to be proven by science. So we're doing that at the moment, and a big part of our research program, which again, we're very blessed and fortunate to have support from government and our community to allow this, is the fact that we'll be, over time, looking to sort of demonstrate unique cultivars that do have those characteristics that are quintessentially New Zealand, quintessentially Marlborough, and ultimately pay homage to some of our leading industries here, such as the wine industry.
Of course, it always pulls through. I'm from Colombia, and the earth itself just brings the coffee alive. So I just had that curiosity. Vera, why don't you go ahead and give us the couple last questions? You're on mute.
I have two last questions. One is, what is your advice to those that are just getting into the industry right now? As a company that is settled and it has grown so fast, and it's a player right now, and it's an established player. What advice do you give? And the last one, well, I want to know from curiosity, why the name Puro?
It's a great question. That's a great question. So look, first of all, the advice we can give in our industry, and this applies to any industry as well, is to know your niche. So as one of my favorite sayings in business is to know your niche and be the best in the world at it. Now, I'm not sure where that quote has come from and who I've just quoted there, but it's a beautiful statement and it summarizes Puro very, very well. So look, for us, we wanted to be, well, not necessarily around being the biggest, we just wanted to be the best. And the best for us is the highest quality, which is demonstrated through organic status and accreditations, and ultimately a value add for our buyers. So that's our vision and our focus, and we've been fortunate enough to implement that strategy and vision. We were seeing a lot of companies come unstuck globally, more so, but you know, potentially in our region as well, is the companies that have attempted to be everything. So it's quite easy to be caught up with the numbers and lost in the numbers and overlook how hard it is at every aspect of the value chain to achieve success, especially in the pharmaceutical and the medical side of the industry. And many companies that have attempted to be fully vertical, so from seed to cultivation, right all the way through to extraction, manufacturing, and then distribution to patients, we consider that as a weak link organization. So you are as strong as the weakest link in that chain, and it does not take much for that to fall over. So anyone looking to get into the industry, obviously highly encourage it. It's a beautiful industry. It's a challenging industry. It's exciting. It can do a lot of good, and really just to pick a niche, to find out where you can add value to other companies in the industry, rather than necessarily attempting to try and be everything, because if you spread yourself too thin, you'll be very good at nothing, potentially, unless you're a superstar, which I haven't found too many of those. And the name Puro is a play on the 100% pure New Zealand branding. So Puro is Italian for pure, but we really wanted to have an image and messaging that really sort of shone our company values, which is, you know, producing the purest, highest quality cannabis that is available in the world. And Puro popped up out of that that sort of discussion, and we adopted that name and our branding accordingly.
Cool.
That's
Well,
amazing. Tim, thank you so much for the time you've provided for us today. We will make sure that this video gets edited and sent over to your team. We would greatly appreciate if you could maybe pass over a couple of photographs from your company, from the whole distribution process, or anything that you find suitable, so that we can give it the centerfold importance that it has. High quality would be greatly appreciated. But other than that, it has been a pleasure talking to you and getting to know a company that's so far away from us, that I think, first of all, that's uniquely enough, but then someone who has been so well established within such a new industry. So it's been a pleasure, Tim. Thank you for the time you've provided for us today.